Hey folks, this is Philip with the Everyday Fighter podcast, where we share stories and insights from everyday fighters just like you. Today, I'm talking with Kevin Gleason. Kevin is a boxing coach and trainer out of Florida. This was a special episode for me in that this was the first time someone actually reached out to me and said, "I'd love to be on your podcast." I found Kevin through Instagram. Follow a lot of people on there. One of the things I love following is people that do pad work, like for MMA and boxing, that type of thing. And he's one of those guys that popped up. It's like, oh, this is pretty cool. So we kind of found each other through there, became aware of each other. And little did I know that he was actually listening to my podcast as well. And one day he said, "Hey, I'd love to be on there." And I was like, "Really?" So it was a good. It was a kind of a good hallmark for me in somebody actually reaching out, which was very cool. But also in terms of our conversation, he dropped a huge bomb on me that I was not expecting. And that's actually, I think, probably the second time that's happened to me in the life of this podcast so far. The first one being with Jennifer Hartman. I think it was episode 12 or something. But in any case, I'm looking forward to sharing Kevin with you and his experiences in his challenge, and looking forward to getting your feedback on that. But before we do that, I want to get into our episode spotlight. As a reminder, these spotlights are not sponsored. These folks have no idea that I'm doing this. Most of the time, they have no idea who I am, but these are people or organizations that are doing good in the world, and I just want to share a bit of what they're doing and put a spotlight on them, give them some more attention. So today I wanted to talk with you about Steve Hartman. Steve is a correspondent on the CBS Evening News. His segment is called On the Road, and he looks for organizations or individuals that are doing good work in their local communities, and puts a heartwarming spin on them. And it's not even a spin. I mean, he just comes from the heart, and it's something that I always find to be uplifting. If I'm having a down day, I'm like, hey, let me see what's on with Steve Hartman and On the Road, and it just really brings a bright spot to my day. So I encourage you to seek him out. You can find him on Facebook, also on CBS On the Road. And that is our spotlight. With that, let me jump into our episode with Kevin Gleason.
I started boxing when I was about 13 years old. I had two older brothers. I was always intrigued by boxing. At that time as a kid, you kind of want to be the toughest guy around, So I started boxing locally here in Broward County in Florida, Pembroke Pines, PAL. And, I just, like I said, I always was intrigued with it wasn't so much just boxing. I just wanted to be the toughest kid out there, as childish as that sounds. And then, I boxed through, on and off through high school, trading off for other sports. I played baseball, hockey. I wrestled in high school as well. And then from there, I took a lot of time off, and I'd say by the time I was maybe about 23, 24, I started doing it again just to train, nothing for, competing wise. And I started training, and I linked up with a coach that I knew over the years, and he had just opened up his own gym. And I started, he would pay me to hold mitts for him. And I knew a little bit of experience from coaching, like doing classes with training partners, holding mitts and stuff like that. And he was paying me like $20 to hold mitts for about, I don't know, half an hour, something like that. And from there, it kind of grew into its own, at first it kind of started off as I'll make a little bit of money. Then it was kind of fun. And then, it got a little bit serious from fighters that knew me when I used to compete, or just guys that wanted to work with me. And then it just kind of grew legs of its own and took off, From there, I started off I started coaching at a couple different gyms locally, just, 2-3 hours, because I have a full-time job. I have a 9 to 5. So I started coaching, just to make some side money, about 2 hours a day. And I just started building up my clientele. I started coaching, my private clients at this tennis ball court right by my house. Then got into a gym at Fight Fit, started paying them rent to coach my guys over there. And everything just kind of kept growing and growing. Opened up my own little spot in March. It was a 750 square foot spot. Like I said, we had 4 bags. It was like a private little studio, and I have a pretty good fight team. I coach on an average about maybe 10 fighters. So, it was a little spot. From there, in August, we moved into a 1,600 square foot spot. And that's where we're at right now with it. So it's going great, man. It's going really good.
That's awesome. Dude, I want to go back a little bit. How did you find yourself? You said you started at 13 boxing?
Yeah, about 13 years old.
How did you find yourself in that place where you don't hear that a lot, quite frankly? I mean,
yeah. For me, like I said, I grew up with 2 older brothers. I was always competitive. I don't want to say fighting was in my nature. I always felt like I was pretty good at it, as funny as that sounds. I always remember wanting to be, that kid that felt like, I wanted to be tough at that time. You know what I mean? I didn't want to, just like any kid in middle school, I was in the 7th grade, I think it was, didn't want to get bullied or anything like that. So I wanted to be able to take care of myself and hold my own, So it was one of those. I just wound up in the gym. I told my dad, I'm like, hey, I really want to start boxing. I came home from school one day. And he's like, hey, we're going to go over to the Pines Pal. He looked around for gyms and stuff like that. And we went over to the Pines Pal, and it just kind of started from there. And the thing was, I was never serious with it as a kid. Like, people asked me that. Like, I had, some amateur fights and stuff like that, and some local, smokers and things like that. But I was never very serious with it, because I was always trading off with sports and, girlfriends and, friends, and just doing my thing. So it wasn't until, like I said, about 24 or 25 is when it just took off for another level for me. It became, coaching became something I really loved doing. Competing for me, was fun, but I hated the nerves behind it. I hated the going out. I just could not get past that, especially as a young age. I never had a coach to be like, hey, this is normal that you're feeling anxious, nervous, scared. I never had that. So, going out there, I just thought I was the only one who was scared all the time when it came to competing. And I hated that feeling, but, as far as coaching goes, I didn't know what this was going to intend to be. I was always really good at doing mitt work and things like that. And I knew how to box. I knew boxing, could teach it and stuff, but I didn't expect it to be where it's at right now, So sometimes it's like I'm trying to catch up with the success that I'm having as far as with fighters and things like that. 'Cause I'm like, damn, this was totally unexpected. So yeah, crazy.
Well, when you asked your dad, okay, let's find some place. Was it was it as a reaction to something that was going on for you? I mean, was it were you bullied, or were you you felt like your brothers were picking on you, and
no,
you felt I want to get stronger, or was
I knew that, what it was, I knew that there were kids that were tougher than me for sure. You know what I mean? And middle school, I feel like, is the hardest years for any kid.
Okay.
You're kind of trying to find your identity. Kids are getting picked on. They're either bullying or, so, I used to see that. And I'm like, I'm not going to be that victim. I didn't want to be that. So, not that I went to a tough middle school by any means per se. It was an average school, public school and stuff like that. I guess that was kind of my mindset. And I knew, I knew that for me to be tougher, I'd have to, start boxing. And I didn't want to do karate or anything like that. At the time, there was no mixed martial arts. You know what I mean? It was, I don't even think jiu-jitsu wasn't even that big. I don't even think there was jiu-jitsu. It was like karate or box, So I'm like, man, I got to do something that, if one of these kids try to bully me, I'll be able to take care of myself. I was always pretty athletic and, and able to fight. Like I said, I came up with 2 older brothers. And I always remember thinking if I got into a fight, I'd be able to take care of myself. But I think, that fear, I think with any kid is like, man, I'm not going to get bullied. You know what I mean? So I think that probably drove me into the gym, a little bit more For sure. Nobody wants to get bullied. So I think, that probably had something to do with it, I guess, at the time. I'm trying to really remember what it was. I always liked, I grew up with two older brothers, so we were always roughhousing. My dad he bought us boxing gloves at a young age, and we'd box in the living room a little bit and stuff like that. So I just think it was, I don't know, it was something that just drew me to that sport, and it always did. I mean, I would go and do other things. Like I said, play hockey or baseball or wrestling in high school, but I always went back to boxing. It always kind of, was one thing that I really enjoyed doing. And then when mixed martial arts hit real big, I feel like Florida doesn't have a huge boxing background anymore. There's not a lot of great boxing gyms and stuff. That mixed martial arts is huge out here. So I've been successful in teaching a lot of mixed martial artists boxing, a lot of wrestlers and grapplers and things like that. So that's where a lot of my business comes from, is more mixed martial artists and boxers,
So you were exposed to it in any case. It wasn't like you're going out of the blue and like, oh, let me put on some gloves and let me go into the gym. It was like you were exposed to, like you said, your father at the end.
Yeah,
the stuff first.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for sure. It wasn't like hardcore. My dad by any means didn't really want his kids boxing. Not that he was against it or for it. He wanted us to be happy, but even when I started coaching boxing, he was like, oh, he doesn't like the idea of teaching somebody. You don't want to nobody wants to take damage, and that's his big thing, especially, to the brain. So, I guess you could say I was exposed to it in that sense. And it was just something that always drew me. Like, I always wanted to be the toughest person around. You know what I mean? I always felt that way because I didn't want to be a victim. 100%. I never wanted to be, and no means was I a bully, but I just did not want to be a victim at any means. I don't know why. It was just something that was big to me. I saw, in middle school, I think every kid sees, bullying, especially more now than when I was around, because there's no, there was no social media and things like that. But, I saw my fair share of bullying. I'm like, that's not going to happen to me.
So even in elementary school, you were kind of cool, but then when you got thrown in with so many more people in middle school, then you're like, oh shoot, there's a thing going on here.
For sure. Yeah. I saw it, and I can remember back to sixth grade. I remember seeing like my first real fist fight. I can remember the kid's name and everything. It was a kid named Brandon. He was from New York. This is how good my memory was. I was 12 years old, and I saw this kid. He got jumped. And he used to ride the bus with me to school. And he was a tough kid. He was like a quiet, tough kid, from New York. And it was the first time I was exposed to an actual like fist fight. And you see things on TV and stuff like that. And I'm like, right there, I was like, man, I can't have that, So, that was, I can remember that. Like it was probably like maybe 3 weeks into middle school, and he like I said, he got jumped by a bunch of kids. And that was really where it started, for sure.
Whether it was deserved or not, it definitely made an impact on you.
It opened my eyes. Yeah, I was like, man. I remember going home and I'm like, wow, man. That was the first hand-to-hand combat like live that I had seen in a fist fight. So I didn't want to be in that situation. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was going to get bullied. I think. Going back to it, there was a kid named Excel Perez I can remember his name in middle school, and he was real tough, and he was a boxer. He boxed at the same gym that I went to, and nobody wanted to mess with him. You know what I mean? Nobody wanted a problem with him. So I wound up, as funny as it was, I wound up joining boxing. It was the same gym he was at. So I guess that kind of brings that interest in it. And then from there, it just kind of grew to learn. I always wanted to learn how to, I treated boxing like it was my craft. I always wanted to learn the next thing, I wanted to learn at the highest level I could possibly learn it at. Once you get past the silliness of like, I want to learn how to box so I can beat anybody up that tries to, to mess with me. You know what I mean? So once you get past that, after a year or two, you start developing and realizing what, boxing is really about if you're doing it the correct way,
Mm-hmm. Interesting when you talk about that kid Excel. Was it such that people didn't want to mess with him because he demonstrated that you don't want to mess with him, or
you know what? He just had a reputation, and that's what it is in middle school. I found more is like everybody knew he boxed. He was, a tough kid. He had demeanor. And I think that's what boxing does for a lot of, young kids. It did it for me. Once you know that you can take care of yourself, you're not worried about it anymore. It gives you that confidence. And I think that's what it did for me. For some weird reason, I didn't get into a lot of fights, growing up, because it does that. It's like, okay, this kid actually, he fights, he competes, he probably knows what he's doing. So let's not bother him. And it gives you that confidence, and I think that was probably the most important lesson learned. And, I try to teach that. When I first started coaching, I actually went back to the gym. I was 26 years old when I first started coaching, like hardcore and getting back into it. It was the Pines Pal that I came up from. So it was crazy, walking in there and coaching at the same place that I was at when I was 13. But, I try to demonstrate that to all the kids that I coach. You know what I mean? I feel like boxing has a bad name. To it, because there's certain coaches out there that are giving it that name. You know what I mean? They're not teaching these kids. The most important part about boxing is teaching a kid a craft, a skill, and educating them. It's not just about teaching them, if that makes any sense. So, I always educate my kids and the kids that I coach, like, hey man, it's about being confident, not just with being able to take care of yourself with your hands, but also being able to meet your girlfriend's dad or family and things like that, just being able to carry yourself, you can hold your head up, when you learn to box, and it gives you a whole nother confidence, if that makes any sense. So, and I think it's an important lesson, to kind of learn out there.
When you first set foot in that Pines Pal gym, was there a period of transition for you, or like getting used to, oh yeah, I want to do this, but then, oh, this is what I'm asking for, kind of thing?
I went there with a friend of mine, and I try to drag all my friends into boxing, right from the get, when I signed, or when I was getting ready to sign up for the gym, because I didn't want to go by myself like anything else. You're 13 going into a gym, and it was a friend of mine who lived down the street. He came with me. He lasted the day. And it wasn't because we sparred or anything like that. It was just, it was a lot of cardio. When I realized like how my first sparring session, I think, was, for the first 3 months I boxed, it was more of just like learning the little fundamentals you could, how to throw a jab, how to stand, how to, hold your elbows, keep your hands up, footwork. Then it was like, all right, hey, do you want to spar? I mean, at that point, you kind of learn where you're at. You get humbled in that sense. Never that I thought like I was going to go in there and blaze anybody or anything like that. But I feel like even at a young age, I knew the reality of what I was doing. So it was, that fear that kept me, out of trouble, in the sense of like my first sparring session, so, but I've been in there and I've fought and sparred with guys that were way above my level, that, put a beating on me. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be, if you're in a good gym, there's always going to be that guy who's that much better than you. And it'll always keep you a little bit more humbled, otherwise you're in the wrong gym. I like to say, if you're the toughest and the baddest guy in there, So,
what was that like for you though? Like you said, I mean, it, definitely it takes a little bit, year or two, to get from, okay, I'm learning techniques, to I want to be more educated, right? I want to learn more. But that's a long time, right? A year, 2 years?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, for you, did it take that long for you to make that transition?
I'm still learning, as weird as it is. Even as a coach, and a trainer, there's still things that I pick up on and I learn every day. If you're good at what you do, you're always trying to develop and learn new techniques, new ways, good ways of, to train certain people, because not everybody's different, the mechanics and the way they work. So you're always trying to learn. I mean, if you're, like I said, if you're good at what you do, you're always trying to develop, you're always trying to find new techniques, you're studying your craft. So, I mean, I was always, when I got really into it, believe it or not, it was more of coaching, that I was like really much more so into, wanting to learn the sport inside and out. And as I got bigger and my growth came and people started following me and I started training fighters, and it was like, all right, well, I have somebody's safety in hand, health in my hands, you know what I mean? So then it became that much more real for me in that sense. So, That's when I really started to like obsess over it. I think when I really started to, it was probably about 25 years old when I first started coaching. Like, and I'm like, I'm going to do this, then I started obsessing over it. I'd be on my phone, watching Instagram videos, watching the live fight on the TV, anything I could, do to study that much more, for sure. Mm-hmm. So as a kid, you're just, you definitely want to be the better guy out there. And if you have good coaching, they're going to teach you how to, to have a great IQ in the ring, how to be able to read guys, all those different things. It takes time though. That takes a lot of time, and maturity. Most amateurs, what I see is, when they start boxing, it depends on the age. There's always the talent kids, they're super talented. But when they start to develop their IQ is when they hit about like 15, 16, depending on how many fights they've had, before that, they're just going out there and fighting. It becomes instinctual over time. They've sparred so much but when you start to get a little bit older, 15, 16, 17, you start to kind of realize like, how to actually use your head in the ring, how to use your mind and outthink a guy and outwork a guy,
I mean, even when you hit those kind of almost like defining, I won't say moments, but there's that period of like, realization again for that transition from okay, focusing on the techniques and learning to like, okay, I want now there's more of a pull for you. What even back then, and I know, I want to get into like what it's like now too, but even back then, what kept you in it? Because I mean, like you said, your friend didn't last a day. You lasted a little bit longer than that.
It was the competitive nature. Like I just like playing sports. That was another thing. I think that's what kind of kept me in it. And I just wanted to be busy playing sports, doing something. My dad always had a saying. I used to practice every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the beginning. And on Fridays, I didn't really want to go and train, not because I was lazy or anything like that. I just want to hang out with my friends. It was Friday after school. My dad always used to say the same thing. When you come back, practice went from, I think it was 6 to 9, we would get home. And he would say the same thing. When you get home, all your friends will be outside doing the same thing, So, and if I did something, he made sure anything I did, whether it was baseball, hockey, I did it for that year. There was no like stopping in between or, hey, I didn't want to do this. It was, hey, you're going to do this for the year. So, he was supportive of what I did sometimes. And it's not his fault by any means. I wish that he was a little bit more, he pushed me a little bit more to like, cause there's times, you start dating girls, you start, hanging out with your friends, whatever it is, life, once you hit, that 16, 17-year-old, you want to do your thing. And, that's where the discipline comes in a little bit more. And I just was so all around the, hey, I want to do this sport and that sport and, always bouncing around, just wanting to try new things, Now I'm older, I wish that, but, he did what, any father would do. Like, all right, you want to play baseball? We'll do that. You want to do this? You want to do that? You know what I mean? Just as long as I'm not quitting anything. So for me, I always just liked sports. I always loved sports. It was one of those things. I to be honest with you, I chalk up the fact that, like, I'm sure you've seen some of my mitt videos. The reason I'm so good at holding mitts is because I played baseball from the age of 4 to like 15, and I was a catcher. So I had great hand and eye coordination, So I think that had a big to do with it, So I just think that it's kind of discipline especially at a young age. You have to have your parents and your family, they have to have a good foundation behind you, pushing you to keep going and good structure there, with your family. Like, hey, this is what you got to do. You don't have a choice, we're going,
Well, I was thinking, I mean, you already had it in your mind that it was like a season for you. Okay, yeah. Well, it's baseball season. It's, whatever. Oh, it's boxing season now. So
absolutely.
The thing that this part of it is, there was no real, let me try it. It's just like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. It was kind of one of those things. And then, life just takes a hold of you, whether you're in a relationship with a girl, when you're young. For me, I had like what I feel like a completely normal upbringing in childhood. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I got a girlfriend. I'm gonna, you're a young kid. You're like, this is what I'm doing, or hey, my friends are doing this. I'm not, my dad kind of let go of the wheel at probably about 16 in the sense of like, I'm not going to force him to do anything he doesn't want to do, but at a young age, it was like, hey, we're doing this, period, but once you got to a certain point, it's like, hey, he's 16 years old. He's going to, one day he might like playing baseball. The next day he might like, tennis, so that was kind of the way my dad was. he supported me with whatever it is that I decided to do, as long as I was doing something. You know, he wanted me to be active in anything, you know.
So you did that for a bit. You started, moving around to different interests. But then it came back to you early 20s.
Well, there was a period I actually I had cancer when I was 18 years old. So that kind of, that like threw everything off. Not necessarily like it just stopped boxing and stuff, but I hit you with a bomb there, huh?
Yeah.
So that kind of just put a hold on everything. You know, that like, stopped sports in general. I didn't do anything. And then, from about 18 to 20. And then I just completely stopped doing all those things. So
when that was out of necessity, though, yeah?
Yeah. I just, exactly. But from there was, when I picked it back up, like I said, it was just getting back into shape. You know what I mean? I didn't even think about fighting. Like it wasn't even on my mind in that sense. Like for a long time, you know what I mean? For a long time, it wasn't something that was big. It became, like I said, when it started becoming as big as it is now was when I was about 24, 25 years old is when I started training in the gyms. And then I'm like, you know what, man, this is really what I want to coach. You know, I thought about it and it was like, this is something I really want to do. So
yeah, let's back up to that little bit of a speed bump there. 18 years old, you get a diagnosis of cancer?
Yeah, I had been diagnosed with leukemia.
Okay.
It's a blood cancer. Out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere. So that was my senior year in high school. It was a speed bump for sure. And that kind of just changed the structure on a lot of things, you know what I mean? As far as, wanted to be in any sports, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, how did that come up for you? Because I mean, you said like if it was out of nowhere, what was the first clue? What was the thing that got to that point?
I had a bruise on my arm from low platelets, and as an 18-year-old kid, I was always active. You know what I mean? It was always playing sports and and having a good time and roughhousing with your friends. So I didn't think anything of it, but it continued to grow. It got bigger. Finally we went to the doctors and then, they took my blood there, took a CBC. And they're like, hey, we think that, my cells were, with leukemia, it blows up your white blood cells. So, my white blood cells had expanded and they're like, we think that he has leukemia. You have to bring him to the hospital. They rushed me over to Joe DiMaggio Hospital right here in Hollywood, Florida. And then from there, that was on a Friday. On Monday, they couldn't do any testing. They couldn't, fully take, bone marrow, to find out what it is exactly. So on Monday they had done the testing and that night we knew that it was leukemia officially 100%. So that kind of, derailed everything, you know what I mean? In general, from sports to boxing to life. So, yeah, so that was 100%, my focus there,
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as especially around that time of life. I mean, that's when you see all your friends around you. They're getting ready to start their lives.
Yeah, senior year, man. They're, prom, all those things that, So yeah, it was tough. That was tough. That was the biggest fight of my life, So that was a rough one. Senior year. I didn't go to prom. I didn't get to do all those things. I actually didn't graduate with my class. I came back because I made that decision, I couldn't obviously graduate my senior year. So they were like, hey, listen, you could do homeschool and, you won't be able to graduate with your class, but you'll get your degree. And I'm like, no, man, I wanted to come back and, I wanted to graduate and I wanted, that normal life back. So I'm like, I'll come back, I'll go back to school and finish my senior year the right way when I get, healthy, which I did. And then I wound up graduating.
So what was that like for you? Because I mean, when you heard that and like even your family, but more so you, a lot of folks, if they hear cancer, I mean, they're already thinking, oh shoot, 50-50 kind of a thing. But was that on your mind, or was it like, you were just like, was it really for you just a speed bump?
When they told me that they think I had leukemia, I had no idea what the hell that was. I'm not even gonna lie. My mom immediately knew what it was. I mean, she had said it right there, so I was like, wow, this cancer, it's one of those things. Ignorance is bliss in that sense at the beginning for the first, 2 days. And I had already put it in my mind because we had, like I said, I was hospitalized from Friday to Monday. There was no going home. I was in the hospital, and I had already put in my mind, the worst. So I was like, all right, this is cancer, because they're like, listen, it could be diabetes. It could be a lot of different things, but I had already put it in my mind, as weird as that is, I think that may be the fighter mindset. Like, hey, come out expecting the worst, prepare for the best, expect the worst,
Yeah.
So, it was already in my mind. And then, when I knew it was, official, I mean, yeah, it was just, in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to beat this thing. You know what I mean? I just, and I think now being, I'm 32 years old now, it would be a whole different, you would be on that 50-50 mindset 100% as an adult, things like that. As a kid, you're just relentless, you know what I mean, with your mindset. And, I think it was a healthy mindset that I had that, that was, I don't want to say that's what, modern science also beat cancer, but, that healthy mindset definitely got me through it, that, hey, this is just, I'm sick, you know what I mean? And as bad as that fight was, you know what I mean? I was in there for a year, all kinds of, the chemotherapy, all the worst stuff. I was like, this, I'm going to beat this, I never ever thought once that I can't beat this,
Yeah.
And I had a great, my family was amazing. They were right behind me, supportive and stuff like that. My dad I think he was the one who kind of made that mind structure with everybody in my family, my mom, my dad, or my brothers, my sister, like, hey, this is just going to be a speed bump, which it was, and that, just like in the ring, you know what I mean? Everything's a fight. You just got to, fight hard essentially, So, I mean, I chalk everything in my mind to fighting especially at this point, whether it's work or, relationships, whatever it is, I do the same thing, especially with a situation like that, So looking back at it, if I'm 32 years old and you tell me that, I'm going to think, just like you said, 50-50, you kind of, and especially being that I went through it once, you're like, oh my God, man, but, when you're young, you're so relentless. And it is that saying that ignorance is bliss. Like, you hear about things when you're 18, like cancer and chemotherapy and radiation, but you don't know anything of what you're about to get hit with. You know what I mean? It was a bomb. So yeah, it was crazy, but it was a speed bump in my life, and it made me a better person,
Wow, man. I'm so fucking blown away. That's so crazy.
Yeah, it was nuts. It's a crazy time.
I bet. Well, I mean, what was it after they said, okay, you've gotten over the speed bump? Is it such that is there fear of it coming back, or is there is there any chance of that, or?
At this point, no. I've been in remission for about 13 years. Yeah. So I mean, anything's possible. But they say once you hit, I think it's like 6 years, the chances of come back are slim to none. In the beginning, yeah, you go through just like anything. You go through a little bit of post-traumatic stress. For a year, the way it would work was I go into the hospital. I'd be in the hospital for about 2-3 weeks. In the hospital, I come out for about 5 or 6 days. So I'd be going through treatment, and then immediately I become what they call neutropenic, where you don't have any blood cells to fight any infections, so you can't go home. So unfortunately, I would have to sit there in the hospital for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then you come home. I was at home for about like 6-7 days, and then you go back into to the hospital to go get treatment again. It was just that cycle for a year. So what happens is you get so accustomed to somebody essentially taking care of you, the nurses, the doctors, etc., that you get post-traumatic when it's done. It's almost like when you tell like a soldier, hey, you're coming home. You know what I mean? It's like, well, what do I do now? So there was always that transition of, you're just so happy to be alive and that it's over, but you're always thinking like, man, what happens if, especially that first year, because it's most likely to come back in that first year. But yeah, you definitely go through that, but it grows you, it's a learning experience, and you think to yourself, I could withstand that, it's a cakewalk from here, Well,
let me ask you though, because I mean, it's one thing going through it. You get used to, as you say, kind of the rhythm of, it's like, 3 minutes in, 1 minute out, 3 minutes out, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But then now that part is over. But there's still, I mean, even though physically you're not going back to the hospital as often, it's a kind of a different, you get out of that rhythm, right? You're home now, you've got a few years out from that. Okay. I think, we're good with the chemo. We're done with all of that, right? It looks like, you can move forward now, But then there's still that, as you said, like in kind of that post-traumatic there's still that emotion that you carry with you.
For
right.
sure.
So how did you deal with that, for the next few years?
It was rough, man. I'm not going to sit here and lie, because you go through, certain things will happen, and if I see a bruise on my arm or anything like that, because that's how I had found out that I had cancer. Little things like that, you do go through that post-traumatic stress, and I just think to be honest with you, getting past all those things, it's time. I'm a big believer in time heals everything. You just have to literally go through it. Unfortunately, you don't want to over-educate yourself, if that makes any sense. Like, you don't want to read too much about, in the sense of like, hey, what kind of treatments I had and what kind of thing it could, post-life can be like with that. So it was more of, and especially when you're young, in the first year, I was really happy to just be alive. Everything was kind of a new experience. The first year, as weird as it wasn't the first year. It was probably the second or third year, you kind of go through it, because then it's like, all right, well, now what? The first year you're just so ecstatic to be able to do certain things. Like, I had no hair on my head. I would always wear a hat, no eyebrows. So, you're embarrassed to kind of go out. So that first year you're like, you're back to normal. You have your hair on your head. You look good. You feel good. So it's exciting for that. It's like a rebirth. Right. I think the second year, when everything kind of subsides a little bit, but for me, man, I'm a big believer in time healing everything. If you're actively working towards it, of course, like focusing on, hey, it's going to be a good day, whatever the situation may be. Sure. It's going to be a good day. Everything's going to be fine. That's the past. Close the chapter. Move forward. So
was that something that did you have people to help you through that, like to talk to? Did you go to counseling? What was the? What was it's. We talk about that a lot, particularly in fighting, right? Especially you're in the ring. You're one person in the ring.
For sure.
You have a team with you as well, but ultimately you have to walk through there. I mean, but like, did you have a team that you could lean on a bit? I mean, just to carry a little bit of the burden with you?
My family, for sure. 100%. My family was there for me. They were very supportive. But like I said, it is one of those things. It's time. I really truly believe, my family, I could talk to them, but just like anything, unless you're there and you've done it, you can't understand it. Right. So, my family was great. They would listen, the doctors and, to this day, I still talk to some of them, and I still see them and stuff like that. There was a time where, this kid, Thomas, that came into the hospital when I was probably midway through my treatment. I was probably at the lowest point. And he had spoke with me because he had gone through the same exact treatment the year before. So yeah, I mean, those kind of things, definitely you draw some sort of, I guess you can say, inspiration, or, hey, everything, confidence. But, be looking back at it when you're so young, it's kind of like, it's foreign to you. Any kind of post-traumatic stress. I didn't know what, I would get anxiety about it. I legitimately would get some sort of feeling of anxiety. I didn't even know what anxiety was. When you're 22, 23 years old, nobody tells you like, hey, this is an anxiety attack or whatever it was. So I just think it was, once I learned that, that, hey, man, I think people get so wrapped up that they're the only one going through something like that. You know what I mean? With anything. And really, there's tons of people going through, post-traumatic stress from all kinds of situations. So I think now looking back as an older individual, I usually draw inspiration from people that have been in the same situations that are better now. I think that's an important thing, or finding inspiration in any kind of situation,
So whatever you could at the time that was like, okay, let me, that would kind of get me through it. I'll get through it. But ultimately you were resolved in, I just got to get through. That's all.
100%. 100%.
It is what it is, kind of a thing.
Absolutely. It's about having a healthy mindset. It's funny. I had a guy that comes to my gym and he trains with me, Dustin Arnold. He just fought last Friday, and unfortunately he lost his fight, and it was unfortunate circumstances. That's the game of boxing. Sometimes he got caught with the right hand in the beginning of the fight, swelled up his eye. And, it buzzed him. The shot was, it was a hard right hand right in the beginning, broke his hand in the second round. And he went on to fight, that whole fight with a broken hand, never said anything in the corner, never said a thing, and went out, and he got beat. And the whole time he stood on his feet, he ended that fight on his feet, never hit the canvas, and he fought through. And you know what it was? On Monday, I was thinking to myself, and those are the kind of things, if you really look for inspiration, you can find it. Like this guy, not to mention he's a single father, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this kid, he could have at any point said, hey, my hand is broken. I don't want to, stop the fight, or my eye is swollen, he's cut, his eye's swollen. And on Monday I was driving to work and I was thinking about that. And that's the kind of thing I think is right in front of you, but people don't find inspiration, and I think to myself, I'm like, man, like that inspired me. I'm like, no matter what it is that you're going through, if you keep trucking away, you're going to end that fight on your feet. You know what I mean? So I found extreme inspiration from that situation. I try to do that as much as I can, focusing on the little things like that, that inspired me, man. That kid had an iron will. And it wasn't just about the fight. It was, I feel like any, regular Joe can look at that and be like, man, that kid really went out like a real warrior, like he ended that fight on his feet. He never quit. He never stopped. And that's life, with whatever situation, whether you're sick or going through depression, anxiety, whatever it is that you're going through, if you keep fighting, you keep that forward mindset, you'll get through it.
So I want to go into when you started getting back into the game after you found your feet again.
Yeah.
A little bit of a speed bump there. You decided to get back into the fight game, but in a different way this time, as opposed to kind of competing and taking or giving damage.
Yeah.
Bringing people up. What was that like, and what was that decision process for you? I mean,
as far as coaching goes?
Well, yeah, just like, I feel like I want to get into coaching. Well, I mean, it was something like you just woke up and like, yeah, I don't want to take the hits.
No, it really, but yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, it really just kind of, like I said, it kind of grew like, on its own, essentially. It was more of just, I knew I had a talent, was holding mitts. And I knew the game. It was just kind of, I wound up in the gym helping guys out. And then from there, I wound up training, 2 guys, that were MMA fighters and just helping them out. It wasn't like I was making any money off of it. It was, helping them get ready for the fights. I love to do it. And then, when they started getting successful, more people came to me. And it just kind of grew in that way. And for a while, it was like, to make a good living off this, you're not going to make a lot of money off fighters, man. It's just not going to happen. You'll make a little bit of money. If you're super successful, yeah, you can make money. And I'm not saying, that is something I would love to do. But from there, I kind of transitioned into, at the time, I was just coaching fighters. And I met a guy by the name of Jeremiah Master Street, I believe his last name is. He's in New York. And me and him met. He came down here to do an event, a boxing event. He's a trainer as well. And he kind of, he schooled me a little bit on ways to make money, how to bridge the gap between coaching fighters and fitness individuals. And from there, it kind of just, that was that was like the connection right there for me, where I was like, it all just kind of took off, because once I started coaching, I had a couple fighters, started coaching individuals who just want to learn how to box. Then some of them who just want to learn how to box for the funness of learning started taking fights. It just grew, from there. And, as far as coaching goes, it was just, I always liked being a leader and a coach. I always felt like I had that chip on, even as a kid, as a young kid, I liked being a leader. So it made sense, once I started doing it, and it just grew. I didn't expect it to happen. It just did, Yeah. As crazy as it is.
Was there ever any thought in your head as far as like getting into it and like kind of just almost, I guess you weren't really starting from scratch, but I mean, it's a different, say label, but it's a different hat that you put on, right? From like helping people just in the
for
gym
sure.
to like, okay, now I'm a coach, now I'm a trainer, kind of hanging your shingle out like that. Was there any challenge for you in making that change at all? Like, am I really this guy, or am I qualified, or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You, I say you run into that. I would like to say I run into that situation once a month. You always think that, especially now I'm kind of running and managing my own gym. You're like, man, can I keep this going on? Yeah, I remember my first time I cornered somebody. I was extremely nervous. I was more nervous than I would be when I was. The thing is that person. If you train that person for that whole camp, that whole fight, their safety is in your hands. In my opinion, I think that's the most important part, and that's the most stressful part of it. The fight is easy. As long as they walk out of there, healthy, you're all right. But that was always a big thing that I realized right from the start. I'm like, man, I'm a boxing coach. If somebody gets knocked out, it's, that's on me. That's my responsibility, So, yeah. And luckily, I don't even want to say that because I don't want to jinx myself, but I've been successful in that not happening yet, But, yeah, you always think that, sometimes I put the passion over certain things, and, as a coach, you know what I mean? You feel like this is a business. That's where I think I have the hardest transition is like, hey, I have a business. I own a business. Sometimes I put the passion of, hey, how I feel about the sport and the guys that are there over, hey, paying the bills essentially. Like, so those are, I think, the biggest adjustments. I mean, I'm very confident in what I do. I mean, and that the only way to become confident is to do it, right? You have to continue to be successful doing it. And the more you do it, the more you learn. I learn every time I'm in a fight camp. There's something I pick up on, something new, like, that I would have done. Maybe I wouldn't have done that time or going to do in the future. So the more you do it, the more confidence you grow, for sure. But, I think like any fighter, they're always sitting in the back thinking like, did I do everything? Did I do all the necessary things before this fight goes down? You think the same thing as a coach. I mean, especially if you're, if you put a lot into it, I always think that in the back. I'm like, all right, did my guy do everything? Did I do everything as a coach? Yeah, I mean, personally, I maybe it's just a passion, but I always tell every one of my fighters, you see these mega gyms out there nowadays that have, tons of fighters. I coach guys. I coach about 10 guys on and off. And I say the same thing. If you lose, I don't have 3 or 4 other guys that's like, oh, well, don't worry about it. Every guy is their own. If they lose, I lose, and that's how I treat every fight, if that makes sense.
How do you get over that, man? Like, because like that, especially because you take it so seriously, right? It's not just, okay, we're gonna run through the drills, we're gonna get your fitness up and that type of thing. It's like I mean, to use your word, like their health, their safety, you feel is in your hands. Now, whether that's fair or not to say or to take on, that's a different question. It's the fact that, the fact is that you do, right? So it's easy for us, especially Instagram, and you get these highlight reels from coaches and trainers and stuff. Oh yeah, this was our plan. Blah 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 blah. Like, executed perfectly or whatever. Yeah. But then you living in the real world and understanding is like, oh my gosh, this fighter's health is in my hands. I'm sure there are times when you're thinking, even as you mentioned, like, did I do everything? Am I doing everything? And there's that doubt. I don't think that ever necessarily goes away completely. How do you manage that, man?
I think you're absolutely right. If you're in love with what you do and it's a passion, you're always going to have. If you're a good coach and you care about your guy, if you truly do care about your guy inside out, I think, at least for me, I'm always going to feel that way. I don't care if my guy is unstoppable, and you're always going to think that, or at least I do. Maybe that's from the competitive standpoint, because I've been there. The more you do it, the more confident you get, for sure. But there's always those nerves, there's always, and it's healthy, fun nerves. I always say this, just like when you're competing, that healthy nerve is going to keep you sharp. It's going to keep you away from really getting hurt 9 times out of 10. It's the same thing as a coach. Those healthy nerves, when you're in a corner, it's just, it's very fast paced, so you just have to act instinctual, what it is that you see. It's essentially, it's almost like you're fighting, if that makes sense, from the outside. The only thing is, the nerve-wracking part is you can't do it. I can tell my guy the adjustments that he needs to make, but I can't do it for him, and sometimes that's not going to work, So I think it's one of those things. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. I try to leave no stone unturned when I'm training my guys, for a fight. I'm not going to say every guy is perfect. There's certain guys that work way harder than others, and that's in any gym with any fighter, So it really comes down to just the work that you put in, If you put in the work, you'll go out there feeling confident. No matter what, there's always the fear of anything. But I know, I had this conversation with my buddy last night. I said, I feel like I know when my guys are going to win their fights 9 times out of 10, because the work they put in. I never go out there doubting any of my guys, but I have kind of I'm a very playful guy. I don't take a lot of things serious, but when it comes to training, if you're training with me, I'm a no nonsense kind of guy. Otherwise I just, there's no point in training you. You know what I mean? If you're not taking it, if you're going to fight, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. I'm the coach, you're the fighter. And I've had that situation, especially coming up, at a young age, where it's like, I've had a couple big names, and I kind of let them run their camp, and that there's no success in that. You know what I mean? It's just like a job, you're employing me to do something, I'm going to do it. So, it's that 100%, I feel is the work is what gives you that confidence. Like, hey, I know that I did everything that I needed to do as a coach. He did everything he needed to do as a fighter. We're good. And at worst situation, you lose that fight, you can hold your head up and know that, hey, I did everything I needed to do to win that fight.
You put in the time. I mean, kind of like what you're saying earlier as well. It's like, it's just, it's you what you're saying, like time heals, or time, applies to whatever it is. It helps out a lot.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Let me ask you, as far as like, you can hear the passion in your voice. Absolutely. And the fact that, you really take a lot of this seriously, but it's very different, as you'd already mentioned, between like that and the business side of things, particularly since now you have your own place and there's more at stake. You've got rent due and all that. I mean, what is that process like for you? What is that? How do you try to balance that out?
It's tough, man. I'm still learning, to be honest with you, I'm still learning how to do that. I used to believe that if you love what you do, you're going to make a living in it. And it's true, but there's more to that. I used to believe that, like, hey, you know what? I'm going to train this guy for free. And it'll pay off dividends. And in the beginning, it definitely did. But now you get to a point where it's like, I got to pay the bills. Right. I have to. And the truth of the matter is if my business goes down, is that guy, if I can't pay the rent that month, is that guy going to give me the money to pay that rent? You know what I mean? So it definitely, it's hard, man. It's one of those things that you have to, it's hard for me to say no. And that was something that, especially guys that I've come up with that I've trained for a long time, and I don't have a big, my numbers are fair, what I charge is super fair, so, it's just that's my numbers. And, I try not to cause an issue with it in that sense. Like, hey, if you can't afford it, I'll try to look out for you. I don't have that issue so much anymore where it's like, hey, this is, your rent's due, man. I don't have that real issue, but it's hard when that somebody's going through it financially to be like, hey, man, you got to pay your membership. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the hard part.
Have you found that you have like a kind of a backup type position to go to now, or is it such that you still have to? I mean, it's hard when you like it pulls on your heartstrings, man. You talk about like your friends, like, hey, there's a single dad, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just how hard they hit you or how well they react to whatever you hold up.
For sure,
there's personal stuff there too.
Yeah, I mean, it 100% is. So it's hard to kind of hit a guy over the head for money. It's one of those things, man, where, I think that's why I have a second job, because it's like, there's times where I've kind of let that go. It's like, all right, well, you can't pay it. I get it, man. Just like you said, you're a single father, or, your bills, everybody has, bills to pay and everything else. I get it. But again, I've gotten to that point where I don't ask for too much. So, it's one of those things like, hey, man, you can't afford that. I don't know what to tell you, man. You're going to have to go somewhere else. I don't care how much I love you, because my numbers are, my membership numbers are super fair, my pricing and everything else,
You found your line. It's like, okay, this is
exactly. And that took time. That 100% took time, especially in the beginning. I was interning. So a lot of guys I trained was free. It was just a passion and a love that I had and everything else. So now it's kind of like, hey, man, and look, I say it all the time. Some people message me about, training them, and I'll tell them my prices and they'll ask me for a discount. All the time. Yeah. And I literally, what I do is, I just send them, I have, pictures of other people's, gym memberships, how much they charge for prices. I'll send them that and be like, man, I think my numbers are super fair. I said, these guys are, more than willing to train you. This is a fair number, and if you can't afford it, I get it, but I have a business to hold up, and that's the tough part. When you open up a gym, it's not just about it. The love is still there and everything, but it's not just that, you have to pay that, you have to, the lights, the bills are due, man,
Kevin Gleason, this was awesome, dude. I think it's going to be huge for people to find their way to it. If people want to get more of you, how can they do that?
Through Kevin Gleason, 7 on Instagram. So they can find me through there, or kevingleason.co is my website. So, you can look me up, Kevin Gleason, right on Instagram. You'll find me.
That's awesome, brother. Thanks so much for this, man.
I appreciate you having me on, man.
Folks, I hope you appreciated that conversation with Kevin. Like I said, he dropped a really big bomb on me. That was not something that I expected when he talked about his cancer and what he had to deal with through that. But, you can hear it in his voice and the things that he said, and that it really did make him better. And, it's a great learning experience for him. I'm really walking away with a lot of great insights just even from that experience that he had, and I'm so grateful to him for sharing that part of his life with us. But that is it for today's episode. Again, this is Philip with the Everyday Fighter Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.